Leviticus chapter 11 deals with the distinction between clean and unclean, particularly in relation to animals and in relation to death. For the way that the Lord would fulfill his promise that they would not suffer the diseases of Egypt is that he would give them rules about personal hygiene, about foods that they could eat, and how they were to keep themselves clean. And Leviticus chapter 11 is a long chapter. We read part of it the other day, where the Lord instructed Moses and Aaron, saying that in terms of animals that they could eat, they could only eat those that chewed the cud and had a divided hoof, which turns out to be the cow, the sheep, the goat in particular, that are purely vegetarian, that there should be no disease cycle build up. If they were to eat pig, which is the classic unclean animal, then pigs eat human waste and eat dead animals, and so they would be eating death, not life. And so we have the clean animals, we have the clean fish, that is those with scales and fins, we have the clean birds, those that are not carrion eaters, and we have the clean insects, which are the grasshopper. We continue in verse 24 of Leviticus chapter 11. By these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries part of the carcass of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. The carcass of any animal which divides the hoof, but is not cloven hooved, or does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches it shall be unclean. And whatever goes on its paws among all kinds of animals that go on all fours, those are unclean to you. Whoever touches any such carcass shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries any such carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It is unclean to you. These also shall be unclean to you among the creeping things that creep on the earth, the mole, the mouse, and the large lizard after its kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. Anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean, whether it is any item of wood, or clothing, or skin, or sack, whatever item it is in which any work is done, it must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until evening. Then it shall be clean. The unclean vessel into which any of them falls you shall break, and whatever is in it shall be unclean. In such a vessel any edible food which any water falls becomes unclean, and any drink that may be drunk from it becomes unclean. And everything on which a part of any such carcass falls shall be unclean, whether it is an oven or a cooking stove, it shall be broken down, for they are unclean, and shall be unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern, in which there is plenty of water, shall be clean, but whoever touches any such carcass becomes unclean. And if a part of any such carcass falls on any planting seed, which is to be sown, it remains clean. But if water is put on the seed, and if a part of any such carcass falls on it, it becomes unclean to you. And if any animal which you may eat dies, he who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. He who eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes, and be unclean until evening. He also who carries its carcass shall wash his clothes, and be unclean until evening. And every creeping thing that creeps on the earth shall be an abomination, it shall not be eaten. Whatever crawls on its belly, whatever goes on all fours, or whatever has many feet among all creeping things that creep on the earth, these you shall not eat, for they are an abomination. You shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping thing that creeps, nor shall you make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled by them. For I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore consecrate yourselves, and shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth, for I am the Lord, that brings you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the waters, and of every creature that creeps on the earth, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the animal that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we've read these verses together. Modern Western society is very conscious of the need for cleanliness, for washing of hands, of keeping water supplies clean, and in the abattoir business and meat trade, huge effort is made to keep animals clean. So in Western society, it's not uncommon to eat pork and pig, but there is a huge investment in making sure that that pig meat is safe. The children of Israel didn't have in ancient times the opportunity for such sophisticated production mechanisms. And the Lord's simple answer was, there's no need for you to eat these things. I didn't design them to be food for you, and because I am holy and I want you to be holy, I want you to avoid them. So Moses has given the instructions about the things that can be eaten and the things that can't be eaten. But a huge emphasis in the chapter is what happens with death. When you find something that is dead, it very quickly begins to break down, particularly in a warm environment like Israel is. As a lad on the farm, if you came to a dead sheep a couple of days after it died, you had to stay upwind of it. It really stank. And soon it was covered in maggots. So these things are obviously unclean. And the children of Israel were to recognize that this uncleanness began when the animal died, and the carcass was to be removed, but anybody who touched the carcass would be affected by it and needed to wash and to wash their clothes and be careful not to contaminate other things. This is what it means to be unclean, so that when you come in from doing something that is dirty, you have a wash rather than go and prepare food and so spread the disease around. Disease spreads very easily. How often do we have food contamination that has occurred because people have not been meticulous in maintaining the cleanliness of their operation? Today we understand through microbiology the mechanisms by which disease is spread. The Lord hasn't included in the Bible a whole microbiology textbook to explain how these things happen, but that was not necessary. All that is necessary is that you recognize situations that make you unclean, you avoid them as much as possible, but if you touch these things and you become unclean, then you recognize that you are unclean and you seek to wash your clothes, wash yourself, and allow a little bit of time to pass before you're involved in preparing food or doing other activities which if you were contaminated could spread disease. The point that God is making is that He is holy. There is no contamination on God, and the things that He says are holy and clean. What He does is good, and He wants His children to be the same. Therefore we avoid uncleanness. This is just talking about physical uncleanness, but there is also spiritual uncleanness as well. Things that we should avoid seeing, things that we should avoid hearing, things that we should avoid doing, that we might be holy. For I am the Lord who brings you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy.